You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterpictures.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knight here with always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 2006 classic Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Swing, swing, swing. That's me, that's my metal in movie sound as a scythe. Swing.
That is a metal, because I have a scythe here that I could wave around in the air, but no one would hear it. And we are a audio podcast, so it does absolutely no good being here at all, except that we had a good conversation about scythes and old-timey things before we hit record.
We really did. Did you ever try to do that as a kid? Try to make a knife sound like Michael Myers might be wielding it, because every time a killer grabs a knife in a movie, it's like the metal becomes a tuning fork and it just starts making all these swing, swing, noises, and you try your hardest to whip it, and when it gets even moderately close to the sound that a blade might make while you're sheathing it or unsheathing it or whipping it around, you're like, yes, it is possible. Except, no, it's not.
It's close to possible. You can hear a knife sailing through the wind if you do it fast enough, have a long enough knife. But it's not it's not metal on metal. And you can, pull a knife from a knife rack if you have a knife block or whatever really quick. Or if you have one of those ones that is made of little tiny high tensile rods, almost like fiber optic, you can sort of get that sound. Those ones that are self-sharpening. That helps with that sound if you're really after that in your day-to-day life. If you're going Martha Stewart levels of horror kitchen, then you can do that. But for the most part, you don't get that sound. We were watching High Tension, a gorgeous, I guess 4K of High Tension the other day. It was wonderful. It's such a wonderful film to begin with, but it was just beautiful to see it again in, every time I rewatch a film with Chris where he's purchased a new version of it, I really look forward to it, because I may not be a connoisseur in that way of comparing old, say, VHS to Blu-ray to 4K, but am I enjoying it. But there's that knife on metal sound when she's stabbing a body, and it's we, as far as I know, are not made of much metal. I mean, I do have a bolt in my ankle, but I don't have any in my chest.
I didn't know about that bolt in your ankle thing. That's interesting.
Yeah, a wayward gymnastics accident in probably 7th grade.
And now I'm finding out that you were in gymnastics. Gang, don't think for a second that this podcast is just two old friends who know everything about each other, telling the same stories over and over again. I find out more about Lydia doing this show in real time, just like you guys, which, again, here's a whole other value to doing the show with one of your best friends. Very cool. I'll tell you what else is cool, Lydia. I'm going to try not to call you Leslie throughout the entire show. I almost did that.
Go ahead. I'm fine with it. He's kind of my hero.
He's kind of my hero too. And I think to a lot of people, there are a sense of liking these slashers and wanting to know more or wanting to know why. And I think this film bravely answers that question. For kicks, Lydia. It's all for kicks and building up your own legacy, like influencers. This film predates influencers.
And that's like really true. It also predates the true crime fanaticism that has reached a fever pitch in the last couple years. I mean, it astounds me how old this movie really is. 2006. I hadn't watched it, oh God, at least till 2015. Probably I missed a large chunk of its reality, unfortunately, because this is like a movie that was made for us. And I'm sad that I'd missed it for so many years. It very much is an influencer, and I wish that this would have been in the realm of social media, because seeing that angle, and I'm not going to cry for a remake or sequel like everyone has since it came out. I will probably mention a few times while recording this how much I wish there was a sequel, and I do. I'll put that out on Front Street. I follow the news of the purported sequels or the mythological sequel and all of that. I do. And I'm very interested in seeing the short film that premiered last year that is apparently a sort of sequel. But I mean, I really would like to see more of this sort of meta serial killer, horror icon, slasher hero stuff. And we're coming at this hot off the heels of almost exactly that, but done in the most quiet, realistic way with In a Violent Nature. It's almost like it goes hand in hand with this movie even more than I imagined, even though it's not the same, because of its I'm creating my legacy kind of nature.
Meta horror. Is there anything that can go well or go terribly wrong in the entire subgenre of our interest? Now, a lot of people go to 1996 with Scream, and we have one of the most famous meta horror slashers ever made. It will ever be made. Like It or Hate It. And it doesn't start there because nothing ever does. Wes Craven, of course, did it once before with Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Interestingly enough, the first Friday the 13th, or the first Nightmare on Elm Street I ever saw, because I was in and around that right age for when that film released. But let's not forget openly parodic versions of this type of thing, like Student Bodies or Transylvania 65000. Spoof comedies that poked fun at the genre. Student Bodies in particular making fun of a lot of proto-slashers because that film was quite old, in 81 or something like that. And so slashers, really, the way that we understand the genre was just getting going. So, I mean, it's making references to like Alice, Sweet Alice and shit like that. But let's not forget the original meta commentary done in a serious way by none other than America's Dad, Tom Hanks, in He Knows You're Alone. A brief scene in which that character shows up and talks about being a killer in a slasher film and what that means in relation to audience members and what that means to characters in a film. All of this stuff was laid out before Scream ever happened. And then Scream happened. And not only did this meta commentary prove that audiences were interested, but they will also pay a lot of money if you're going to talk about that thing. And so the whole trajectory of 1990s slasher resurgence changed. But there are some gems that came out of that. We've done one 1,000,000 years ago, if you can remember, The Hills Run Red, one of the best meta commentary slashers ever made. Just a good movie that talks about things intelligently from a film fanatic perspective. The other gem of this is this film that we're talking about today. Shocked that it has taken us so long to get to it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a no-brainer in a way that we do this after In a Violent Nature, which is yet another film that I wish we could turn the camera around, so to speak, and watch the horror movie that's going on around it. And we talked about it when we covered the film, that this is done from that unique perspective of the killer. We're following the killer in A Violent Nature and here. And I want quite badly to see the just plain straight old B-grade horror slasher film that is happening in the film. It's not like a movie in a movie at all, but it feels like one. Instead, we get a found footage version of this. And that's the big distinction between the styles of In a Violent Nature and Behind the Mask, is that it is, for the most part, a found footage film. And I tend to forget that it is, because the scenes that stick out the most are some of the kills that don't feel like a found footage film at all. There's a lot of the kills later on when the camera perspective changes. And there are some very iconic horror type scenes of Leslie Vernon, the killer himself, backlit by the moon in an orchard, that sort of stuff is what sticks out the most. So it feels more like a straightforward horror film than it really is. As far as those meta things, another film we've never covered, and I don't think we ever will, that is more like In a Violent Nature than this would be Rubber. And I don't know if Rubber really counts as a slasher, but it is. But it's taking that story and supplanting the killer with something else, in this case a rubber tire. But yeah, this is so fun, and I can't help but think, it crosses that line between serial killers and masked horror movie villains so brilliantly that you almost forget that, by and large, Jason, Freddy, Michael, they're fucking serial killers, man. They are fucking serial killers. If they lived in real life, they are, and they're shaped after serial killers in a lot of ways, of course, like Leatherface and the Ed Gein thing. You probably I have books on my shelf that are shaped after Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, they have some real life things, but while you're listening to Leslie Vernon talk about his craft, you can't help but think of the more sophisticated and talkative serial killers like Ed Kemper and Ted Bundy, of course, and maybe not quite as talkative because he didn't have as much time to do so, Israel Keyes. He reminds me quite a bit of Israel Keyes with, like, let's stalk them, let's shake up our MO. You can't get caught if you do this, if you do that. He's got it all thought out.
He's got a bit of Richard Ramirez in him too, just eating it up, that, like, really playing for the audience, and just that type of attention is part of it. Maybe it was an unconscious thing, but once it is brought to you, oh boy, you're the star of the show. And, it's like anytime that you hear about killers that write into police or write into newspaper people, and it just makes you think, oh yeah, they're trying to, the Zodiac killer had a costume and he wanted people to wear buttons. So he was trying to market himself, sadly.
So warped, so warped, but not dissimilar to our pal Leslie Vernon.
Leslie Vernon is a film where it will absolutely subvert every expectation that you have, up to and including the first introduction of the titular character. You go to this creepy house and you have this woman, speaking of the documentary and cinematic styles, I always forget that there's a different aspect ratio at the beginning of this film. And I have a DVD of this that I got years and years ago when I first saw this film, and I've never upgraded it. I know Scream Factory has like a cool, like, collector's edition that I really should upgrade to, because I would like more special features, and it would be nice to have that kind of stuff. But I always forget about that. But you're introduced to this character, and this whole film has a very autumnal feel to it. It probably has to do with the iconography that Leslie Vernon chooses to have around himself, even though they make a reference to Have a Nice Summer, where I'm thinking to myself, is this supposed to take place in the summer? Everyone is wearing heavy jackets and they're in school. So I don't understand what that line is in reference to, but it seems like a very autumnal film. And so the mood is set, and we are talking about the reality of this film so we can understand it. The reality of this film is those movies that and those slashers that happened. They are not films, they are real, and they were documented as real cases. I don't know how you get away with naming these killers who are all IPs that are owned by different people, and as we've found out over the years, litigious people who will like very, very deftly protect their intellectual properties. But they did it, and they make reference to Freddy and Jason and Michael and even Chucky. And these happened, and we are about to introduce the new generation, Leslie Vernon. And you get the bubbliest, bounciest, chummiest, chattiest, friendliest, look at my turtles motherfucker that you could just have a beer with.
Yeah, he definitely is. You know, that guy that you want to meet at the bar, whether you're like not talking about a woman looking for a mate, but like if you're like a person that's like the type that just goes out to bars to meet people, he's the sort of person you want to meet. He's the kind of guy you want to meet at the library. He's the kind of guy that you want to ask for the time at the bus stop. He is a chummy, friendly, yes. And he is opening up his home to basically reporters in a way, doing investigative journalism. And he just like his arms wide open. You know, let's have apples. Maybe it's from years of working in the apple orchard industry where they are just friendly, sweet people that maybe that's part of where his attitude would have been coming from, because you don't expect this from a serial killer. Most serial killers we know of are secretive and not welcoming. They don't want to open their homes to individuals. Horror movie maniacs, let's say, if they were to exist, wouldn't be like this. Would you want to go and visit Michael Myers at his like home? Like, I don't know where if you count the house as his home, or, you know, you want to go and visit Jason in his shack, you know, do you expect to sit down and have a tea in a clean cup? No.
In a lot of ways, we're being introduced to Leslie Vernon through Taylor and her camera people, Doug and Todd. And we're also getting introduced to Nathan Basil at the same time. They even have almost like an introducing Jamie Lee Curtis. This was his first film. Now, he hasn't done a whole hell of a lot, but if you are trying to hinge an entire film on one guy's performance and his ability to be that friendly guy, but also be believable as a killer, man, is this just a mesmerizing performance from this actor. And the fact that they were able to get him and find him to do this role. And because if you don't like the protagonist, I honestly feel like this film falls apart, because so much time is spent. And for me anyways, cameos, which there's plenty of in this film, can only take you so far. It's nice to hear name drops. It's nice to see Kane Hodder going into old 1428 on Elm Street. That's very funny. But you need so much more than that. And so the performances is like, there's so much of this film that is so intimate that you can forget that there's going to be, at the end, they're still going to have time, miraculously, to almost give you a truncated, full slasher film.
Pretty much. And I think that is where my sort of dissonance with this film comes in, is that I forget that it's documentary style and only think of it as a slasher film, when it is hilarious. If you don't know anything about horror, if you don't know who Kane Hodder is, I don't know how you stumbled upon our podcast, honestly, but if you're not into the genre, you would still have fun with this, because you understand enough by osmosis about the workings of it. When he quips something about, man, you got to have good cardio, you got to, like, you know, do that thing where they're running and you're walking, you got to keep up with them. That sort of stuff will resonate with even a non-horror fan, and they'll get the jokes. And do tell a lot of this backstory in horror shorthand that I think is also super accessible to people that are not horror fans. And that's how, like you say, miraculously, they still have time for a full-on horror slasher at the last maybe 20 minutes of this film.
When we're introduced to Leslie Vernon via Taylor, she is going after that age-old question, Lydia. Why? Why? Why are you doing this? I don't understand necessarily why these characters would desperately want to have this type of show, because is there some kind of what is the ethics of journalism? Is it like the old timey like war correspondent argument where your job is to just document and you as a reporter or a journalist aren't responsible? Or are they accessories to murder? Do they understand? Do they not think that he's actually going to kill anybody? What is it, do you think?
I had the same question when I watched the movie Long Pigs, where they're following a serial killer and making a documentary, investigative journalism piece on what it's like to be a serial killer by following a real serial killer. And when he starts killing people, they're shocked and horrified. It's like, what did you fucking expect, lady? I'm a snake. You know, that sort of attitude. And it's sort of threefold. I think it's partially, yes, I am the unblinking eye. I am the person who will count this to record for humanity's sake. And the second prong of three is I need to find out, yes, why. I need to ask these important questions, because no one can just let you go on unfettered without questioning what is going on, whether it be for the morbid curiosity or what. Or the third prong is the scoop. They're after the scoop. They want to be there on the ground and be the first person to document this sort of behavior in this way. And that doesn't always drive all investigative journalism, because sometimes there is that for the greater good sort of reason. But a lot of the time it is just for the scoop. You just want the clicks.
And Leslie Vernon seems to be very into this idea. One of the things that I like about this film, there's one moment, I want to say like maybe 30 minutes into it, in which Taylor's camera person asks a question, and Taylor likes that. And then it's like, oh, no, wait. It'd be better, Taylor, if you ask him that question, not the camera person. And she's like, okay, yeah, right. And so she goes into her, as you know, as I know, as people who have been interviewed, who have interviewed people, you understand that there is a certain level of artifice where sometimes things can seem off the cuff, but they're not. And there's no disenfranchisement of Leslie Vernon, because I love his line delivery when she just says, okay, yeah. And then she asks the question to him as if she's asking it the first time. And then he just delivers his response in a voice that is so like, he's into it. He's into the artifice, and we'll learn why. But we're not going to learn why about his motives just yet. But he is more than comfortable with telling you how.
And I think that, like some killers, not all, not even half, but some, fucking revel in this. They love being able to tell people because they haven't been able to. For all of the fun that he has, and his neighbor, mentor, friend, also serial killer that lives down the lane, aside from that person and maybe one or two other killers that he's ever met in his time, he has no one to speak to. In the real reality of serial killing, I bet you it's like one or two of them maybe got to talk shop, so to speak, with another killer, and only get that sort of like kind of license to do so once they're fucking arrested and the gig is up, so to speak. So I think that he is just absolutely reveling in it. And he is a bit of an actor. Like, aside from the actor himself, Nathan Basil being Juilliard trained, he is an actor's actor. in this role, it really comes to full fruition because he gets to approach this like it is a dramatic play. And we get this attitude of Leslie Vernon that it is a show. It's about the show. It's showmanship. You have to sell this. You have to trick or seduce your victim into playing that victim for the show as a killer that you are presenting them. And it has to fit into your backstory. Like, it's so much more dramatic. And he really drives this home, right? And then, whether it be a serial killer, fictional maniac in a horror movie, or a trained actor, he turns it on for the press, And that is an excellent question, Taylor. Let me enlighten you with all the wheres and why ofs of my behaviors.
There is a delicate dance with this film's tone that I find is incredibly well done. Because if you were to say, is this a comedy? Or if you were to ask, is this serious? It's both. And I think much like Leslie himself, the tone of this picture can turn on a dime. Whereas I feel like a lot of the meta commentary type horror films, particularly the recent ones that I was railing against in the previous episode, fall too far into this is supposed to be funny and therefore not scary. But I tell you, man, there are certain scenes where Leslie clicks and you see that persona come out where it's dark and it's intimidating, and you realize, oh, much like these charming, the way that Ted Bundy was described, where there was just all of a sudden his face looked different and his victims were to see a side of him that the friendly guy, or the guy grandstanding in court asking people over and over again to describe his own murder scenes so he could just relive it over and over and over again. That grandiosity, hides the fact that you have a cold-blooded killer in your midst. And I think that Taylor is constantly reminded of how serious this is, but in small doses, because she too gets so caught up in the theatricality of everything, even to the point in which she seems excited when she's able to become involved in the tormenting of Kelly. He frames it in such a way that it sounds like he's describing a horror movie. But the interesting thing about this narrative is at no fucking point do they say that this is just like we do it in slasher movies. This is not the world. The world, they don't talk about film. They are not talking about film theory. They are talking about this is how we do it in the real world, because Jason and Freddy and Michael are real guys who elevated this art form from how it used to be in the old days. And he's talking about pulling a brick and I'm going to stand in the shadows while she's throwing out the garbage. He has stalked this girl for months, and she is going to, and we as film watchers know that he's describing a movie scene. But in the story, they're not describing a movie scene. It makes you think about, wait a second, who is all this for? And Leslie will tell us in the narrative that this is for Kelly. All of the things are not for him, it's for her.
To set her up to play that perfect role as victim. Because whether or not they mention film, because the filming of these murders was only in newscasts in this universe. Freddy and Jason exist in the news. They exist in serial killer books and documentaries. It is to set her up to be his perfect victim for the inevitable news, the inevitable documentary, the inevitable reenactment of this. And it's part of getting them to a scared point where, and this would hold water in real reality, psychologically speaking, to get them malleable so that you can behave in whatever manipulative manner that you need to as this deranged killer, and have them react appropriately and predictably.
And man, is he good at guessing people's psychology. You can tell from his home library that a lot of things are how-to manuals and practical things of that nature. You could probably bet that there's quite a few philosophy books, psychology books, human behavior, and also a great deal of what he's learned from his mentor, who we'll be meeting as a previous slasher from the old days. And there is a sense where some of this is almost like a folksy profession that's verbally handed down from one generation to the next. And then there's another sense of, through observation, okay, how do we fall into this trap? Because Leslie Vernon is going to tell us all about his backstory. He is going to tell you how he picks his victims. His survival girl. Interesting, survival girl hits me wrong in the ear as opposed to final girl, but I think it's just because final girl has become so ubiquitous over the years. But survival girl is essentially the same thing. And even sitting outside of a college, it's funny how he scoffs at the notion that that they're picking their victims now. He's like, are you out of your mind? Like, I already have everything already picked out. Which, you know, he'll have a double meaning to that too. But the level of planning that Leslie Vernon goes through, it really is a beauty to behold. And what it does for me is force me to think about all of those other slasher movies, the famous ones, and you wonder, so was Michael Myers walking around the neighborhood for planning everything out, and he's just like, his persona as the killer is so not him, and he was really just like a regular guy trying to chuff up his own image? Was Jason not mangled at all? Is it all just a lie? And is he just standing there behind the mask like a regular looking normal man with a good sense about him and intelligence, and he's going to go back to his actual home after he kills all these teens with furniture and curtains, and he's got credit cards? Is that Jason?
And he just lives down the road from where everything happened, so he can go back there and stalk it and keep an eye on the place.
Mm-hmm.
It was just mental. And to take it to the serial killer point of view, how many serial killers behave like that? And I keep thinking about Israel Keyes, and I thought about Israel Keyes quite a bit while I watched this film. And it sounds creepy to say I think about serial Keyes. I think about Israel Keyes often, but I listen to a lot of Serial Keyes interviews, and I'm listening to one podcast about him now that reminded me again of the book collection that Leslie Vernon has. In the small book collection of Israel Keyes, there was a book on military caching, and he was in the military, and it's tactics of how, it's a handbook on how to keep caches. And Israel Keyes as a killer was very famous for having caches with things from his victims and guns and things ready for future crimes. So he would bury them in the woods. And there's the podcast called Somewhere in the Pines that is using the caching manual from the military that Israel Keyes also had for the tips on how to bury them, so that would help them find out where they have been buried. And going from the interviews that he had after being caught, where he describes the sort of places where he would put caches, and they're going out and searching for them. It's just that weird meta killer kind of thing that fits in really well with the books that Leslie Vernon would have had, the sort of legacy that Leslie Vernon was trying to build for himself. to be 20 years on and have people creating documentaries about him and checking out places where he had murdered, and maybe even the back of that diner where Kelly had gone running because of the door being slammed days earlier. Real serial killers don't seem to do these sort of breadcrumbing that Leslie Vernon does. But then again, we don't really know. Maybe they do.
They might. One thing that I will say in that doesn't really, if we're following the idea of a slasher, if we're following the traditional things that we recognize, the one thing that I think sticks out as this is a no slasher movie, you're combining genres here, is the library scene. So generally speaking, in slashers, and to my recollection, and someone can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I bet I've seen more slashers than you, is that we don't normally go to a library and look at microfiche. That's a ghost story thing.
That's a ghost story thing, and what we typically get, which we also get here in a way, is the campfire story. That's your expo dump in the slashers. Usually, if anything at all, a campfire story.
I think the inclusion of Zelda Rubinstein in this scene is amazing. This was one of her final film roles. She had one movie released after this posthumously called Strange Matters, but in 2006, this was her last role that she filmed and was released while she was still alive. And she is doing what Zelda Rubinstein does, slowly and softly, and in that unique voice unlike any other, delivering a story that's just an old story. She's so great, and I actually got a little emotional this time watching her act, because I'm like, oh, she was such a gift, like such a gift. For those of you who don't know, she's the mysterious person in the poltergeist thing that tells people to go towards the light, child. So it's great. And then we get our second big cameo in this scene, which is Robert fucking Englund as the Ahab type character. To have all of this stuff happen while Leslie Vernon is explaining to Taylor how this is going to play out, Leslie is absolutely correct. Everything happens down to the letter, although he doesn't seem to anticipate the Ahab thing. But the reason why this scene sticks out so much to me as an anomaly is because, so you're trying to tell me that Kelly is going to see a familiar person get murdered in front of her, literally physically see the killer, and then she's going camping or like going to a cabin with her friends to like party and fuck. I don't understand exactly. We've seen the girl works at diner and gets scared by the killer in other films. I mean, Friday the 13th, that happens. One of them anyway. And so that's not really that weird to me, but this scene is absolutely fucking bizarre. I like it. And it allows Leslie Vernon to introduce another horror trope, which not a lot of people talk about, the Ahab, which he goes back to his mentor character, which we kind of brushed over, unfortunately, which is Eugene.
Eugene is hilarious, played by Scott Wilson from Walking Dead fame for the most part. A fantastic actor in his own right. I really love the introduction to him where he has buried himself alive with his super hot wife, which they don't explicitly say, but I swear to God, she must have been a Survivor girl.
I think,
how else would they have met?
I think it's the exact same thing. It's the classic you fell in love with your killer trope that, Stage Fright tried to show us, or even Silence of the Lambs. Like, imagine if at the end of Hannibal, they actually got together.
And in this case, they did, because everything sort of fits, and they don't explicitly say, but you kind of just assume that that's how they met. Because how else would a serial killer meet somebody right? Especially like a real hottie like she is, because
And they have,
even Leslie Vernon says she's hot.
yeah.
But he's buried himself alive for a duration, perhaps a week, just so that he can keep his heart rate low. And if it ever were to happen, it's practice. Even though he's out of the game for the most part, he's gone to pasture, he's relaxing, living life, retired from the scene as a serial killer because he's got his final girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose they don't use the term final girl to really divorce us from the idea that there are films with final girls, because that's where, that, and in books, there's been a big final girl book boom in the past like 5-6 years.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Survivor Girl is something kind of different in this universe, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she has buried him or helped bury him with a breathing tube. Of course, he's an alive human being.
Yes.
So it's just good practice. It's right up there with the whole keeping up the cardio, working on your costume, keeping your weapons sharp, going out there and pre-sawing tree limbs in case your victims need to climb a tree to escape you. They'll definitely fall down. Those sorts of preparations. Burying yourself also seems to be it. But they have a nice, relaxing evening in talking about the craft.
The craft in the old days. When I first saw this film, it was Eugene's line about back in the late 60s, early 70s. It was no one thought about coming back as a repeat killer. So we would just kill a bunch of, he says, sorority girls, and then you leave. And I was always thinking, are they strongly implying or mildly implying that Eugene was Billy? Like, that was what I always thought when I first saw this film. Now, maybe not so much. There doesn't seem to be enough evidence to support that he was the killer from Black Christmas. But when people are talking about, when you bring this slasher from the old days, which even in 2006, sorry to say, Michael Myers, Freddy, and all them were the old days. So I don't know what old days you're talking about, unless, of course, you're talking about the abundance of proto-slashers. Now, if they had said something that made me think of old motel at the side of an abandoned road, I would think, oh, is he supposed to be like a Norman Bates type allegory? Maybe, but that was early 60s, 1960 on the dot. But if you say late 60s, early 70s, you talk about a sorority house, you talk about killing all of them and then getting out of there and never coming back for a sequel. That's Black Christmas.
It is Black Christmas. It's also Richard Speck, and it's partially some of the other uncaught killers in a way. But film wise, I think you're dead on, because that is the and it's also the urban myth, right? That's why you lock your doors. That's why you let people know where you're going. That's why you call your mom every night when you're away at college. That's why you travel in pairs or groups, because of that sort of the myth of some maniac breaking in and killing all the girls in the sorority house, and why we have like House and Sorority Row and Sorority Massacre type films, aside from Black Christmas, which is the one he would have been talking about. Absolutely.
You've reinforced it. I was kind of waffling because I was like, I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely.
We get this moment where the excitement and the chase for that scoop seems to falter in Taylor, where she seems to want to get out of this. And a lot of that is after the library scene. I mean, she did literally see Leslie Vernon kill somebody, right? And Leslie has built up this myth around himself, but there's inconsistencies with things. By the way, just going back to the library scene, the fact that he planted his own microfiche is fucking hysterical to me. But then But when they start debating whether or not he wants to be part of this anymore, or they want to be part of this anymore, pulling the documentary, Leslie Vernon seems both at the same time frustrated but also glad. But he seems more frustrated that they're pulling the idea of doing the documentary around him and walking away. These moments like this are so much more rewarding after repeat viewings of this film, when you get to the real twist of this story, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that moment in which he's holding her face and like holding her against the van, he's fucking scary.
He is fucking scary. And he is, every, domestic abuse situation could begin and end with something like this. It's a domineering man overpowering a woman and basically screaming at her through clenched teeth, "Don't ruin this for me." Which is, it's terrifying. It's terrifying no matter how you slice it, whether you look at it in a gendered lens or you look at it in the fact that she is a journalist that is kind of bound by an ethical oath to not ruin this for him, because she's there as a fly on the wall. She's the unblinking eye. She's the passionate eye. She is the eye that is supposed to stay and let this all unfold and not go to the police, nor go to his Ahab, his doctor, played by Robert Englund, which is why he's so fucking mad. Aside from her doing her journalistic duty to try and get at other sources, get both sides of the story, I can see it from her point of view, wanting to talk to Kelly, maybe not to Warner. I can see her wanting to talk to the doctor, maybe not to exploit Leslie, but to get all angles here.
And the angles seem to indicate, when she speaks to Doc Halloran, which is Robert Englund's character, that Leslie Vernon may not be the upstanding serial killer that she thinks he is. Because
that's a sentence you never thought you'd say.
Yeah. She's like, listen, if you want to murder people and we're going to film it and so you can grow this weird legacy of yourself so you can just come back again and again and kill teenagers till the end of time. That's one thing, but I will not be lied to. Such a journalist, right? Because she was almost in the midst of telling a false story, because Leslie Vernon is literally Leslie Mancuso, who is not this Leslie Vernon person who has co-opted these legendary stories, and maybe they just so happen to have the first name, or is the Leslie Vernon story completely fabricated? How so? Zelda Rubinstein's character, why would she make up that story? So this had to happen, and Kelly would tangentially be related to this person who drowned and the turtles picked his bones, a weird detail that I fucking love. But not this Leslie Mancuso. She's just like your run-of-the-mill, mentally unstable man who wants to be Leslie Vernon. And then it also calls into question, as they talk about how Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and all of them changed the game by mythologizing themselves. Was Jason Voorhees really like Jason Ruberwitz? And like, he was that boy that drowned at Camp Crystal Lake. He died in 1932. Don't worry about it. But I'll pretend I'm this boy. Or did like Mrs. Voorhees actually live and do that murder? And then some guy was like, what if I came back as her son? And then started to mythologize himself that way. There's a lot of possibilities, but this is what starts to break things down between Taylor and Leslie. But she does agree, after kind of being intimidated into it, much like a domestic case. Like, you're so wise in that observation, to get in the van and continue on with this. And her cameramen in tow.
And much like the film Long Pigs, the cameramen seem to just be pawns in all of this. They do have some agency. They could walk away at any time, but they're just sort of like, okay, Taylor, you're the boss.
When Leslie Vernon is describing his movie, let's say, it's not a movie, gang, but let's say, be very clear. He starts describing how all of this is going to go as he is on this farmland, not left to him in a trust. But a place that he's stalked out, that he somehow knows that Kelly and her friends are going to go to. And he describes the order in which he's going to kill things. And anytime that she has a question, he talks about, I don't want to lose containment, or no, that's not how things are supposed to go. And this all ties in with his perception of the survival girl, where they get into deeply psychological notions. And we've seen this type of gender analysis in slashers. Carol Clover, most famous horror, what do you call those things? Textbooks about gender studies in horror, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, talks about this a lot throughout the entire book. Her theory more about like gender not existing in a binary sense, but like merging into one sort of concept of gender as an interchangeable thing, as viewer and narrator. But the sense of like grabbing his phallic symbol, like empowering her with cock, it's very fucking funny. And talking about the survivor girl's rebirth from victim to hero. But she must be a victim first in order for her to be a hero. And this is all culminating into how he's describing the movie that's not a movie, but in his mind. And the film has one masterstroke of a twist yet to pull. But for the most part, this story is brought to us straightforwardly. Leslie Vernon, now we know Leslie Mancuso. Nothing else about the narrative has changed until the third act.
Which is so much fun. When the camera shifts and it turns into a horror film. Mm-hmm. And we have all of this background. And it is really tough to reconcile. And hopefully no one listening is confused when Wes keeps reminding us it's not a film and not in a film, not in the film sense, because it's not. And it's not even after this point, because we're, for all intents and purposes at this point, watching a crazed serial killer wanting to systematically pick off a bunch of people. And sure, that's what a horror movie is. And when we watch Kelly at the beginning of the film running around this edge of the store because the door slammed, we're all like, hee 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 hee, because our little horror movie brains are like, hee 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 hee, she's going to get it. It's not funny when it's real life. Of course, we're still watching a horror film. So it is fucking funny. And it's so hard to reconcile all that when the aspect ratio and camera angle shift. We're no longer in shaky cam. We can see our cameramen for the first time.
Yes. So for the first time, we can see Doug and Todd, who for the most part, actually not for the most part, for the entire part, were just voices behind the camera that we never saw. Now, it just begins to dawn on them, and dawn on Taylor in particular, that when people are, the couple is having sex, that they understood that they were going to do, and Leslie Vernon predicted that he was going to do, and he was going to kill them and arrange their bodies as if they were sleeping, as not to alert anybody too early. once that happens, the situation becomes far too real for Taylor, and she can no longer support this, which is wild because they have this moment beforehand, like a few hours before this is all going down, where Leslie Vernon is doing his makeup. And it's almost like you're looking at a theater. You're looking at Pagliacci's Tragic Clown getting ready for his performance. And he's talking about his relationship to the survival girl. Do you love her? Oh, you love her? And he says, no, I just love the idea of her, because in the largest sense of the word, he is hoping for her potential. And he's also at the same time hoping to fulfill his destiny. But the best scenario for him is if she becomes the survival girl of his dreams. And that means that he is either going to end up dead or he is going to be arrested. The third scenario is he goes into hiding, which I will be the idea, I guess, if the killer survives or manages to take out all of the teens before they take him out. Real Dead by Daylight scenario. He does say that at the end of this, they're never going to see him again, because this is just the nature of the thing. But in that moment when he's sitting up in the barn and he's looking out onto the farmland, and he starts to cry because he's so happy, he's so excited. It's this moment that he's been planning for, that he's been dreaming of, and Taylor holds his hand together, and it's just like, it's such a profoundly fascinating scene and such a good performance. And I just want to go back to that as often as I can, just to remind everybody that while this is an incredibly smart concept, a highbrow concept for a slasher, the performances in this film are fucking great. And again, it all hinges on Nathan Basil's performance. When we start the actual slasher scenario, I don't want to call it a movie, the scenario, the
Good choice.
I find that it's so funny. It goes so fast, but it still feels like a full movie.
It does, even though we know what's coming too. But I mean, even if it was a full-fledged horror film, we kind of would know what's coming, wouldn't we? You know, everyone's going to party. Everyone's going to have a little like tete-a-tete downstairs, and people are going to gravitate upstairs to do what teenagers do. And then someone's going to get killed. They're not going to find the body right away. They're going to go looking for the bodies. They're going to find more different bodies. Like, that's just how it fucking goes. So much like the beginning of the story, which is told in horror movie maniac serial killer shorthand that we can all understand even by osmosis, to speed along the concepts they're pushing, we get a sped along low concept horror film that we already know what's happening. The difference is that we also have this group of people, the three people making the documentary, who have decided they are not going to stand for this anymore, and they're going to stop it. They know what the plan is, so they're going to change the plan. And I couldn't help but thinking of, yet again, Israel Keyes talking about in Interrogation how the murder of the couriers went off the rails. And for all intents and purposes, he had a horror movie in his head that was going to play out, and it started going wrong. Unfortunately, and with all due respect to the relatives of the couriers, it continued to go wrong for them, and it turned out with the end result that Israel Keyes wanted. People were dead. But in between, to hear him tell the story from his storytelling, horror movie in my mind, serial killer point of view, he had a specific idea of how things were going to go, and he had to improvise, much like Leslie Vernon is about to do.
The delicious twist in this film is still not directly mentioned. However, Todd and Doug, once they join in, and Taylor try to interrupt the film or the scenario that is happening in front of them, they're noticing that not everything is adding up. Through the entire story, Leslie Vernon has been idealizing the survival girl who is a virgin. This film subverts that, which, by the way, just as somebody who spends a lot of time in the subgenre, I definitely feel like the virgin aspect of the final girl in film is grossly exaggerated. Grossly exaggerated. It is just something that people have repeated so many times that they think it's fact, and it's not. Most of the films that people are talking about when they're talking about the virginal final girl, there's no reference to if they are virgins or not. If by virginal they mean this one is wearing like pants and a sweater, okay, I guess that's a leap. This film, throughout the entire time, has been telling us that Kelly is a virgin, and then we open the door to go and warn her about the killer, and she is just riding cock, just fucking riding cock, and she's
like arm over the head, whooping like she's a girl on a bucking bronco.
It's wild. I was like, nobody had like. It's not sexy. Like
no.
If someone was,
it's like the sex scene in Phantasm 2. I think it's not, yeah.
But and again, we're subverting expectations again. She's not a virgin. We see that one of the scenarios, the breaker turning off the power, people going downstairs to check it, they're trying to have sex as well. The boyfriend gets killed. The girl who's supposed to be one of the promiscuous girls runs upstairs. And this starts, we have our stoners, we have our jocks, and we have our nerds, and we have all these things converging. Plus we also have Taylor and this camera crew who are part of the plan. And we learn to the extent of how much this camera crew is part of the plan when Kelly, unceremoniously, while just protesting, sorry, I'm sexually active, gets pulled through a window and is killed. And the initial thought is, well, his plan has derailed, and now his survival girl, who's supposed to, at the very least, be the last one to die, is like the fourth or fifth person to die, and they still have plenty of living people left. So what is going on? And as we move through the farm, again, we learn the truth, which is it was, is, always has been Taylor.
I love this. The twist isn't that he has an Ahab. The twist isn't that he's not Leslie Vernon. And the twist isn't even that Kelly is not a virgin. And all of this is in the backdrop of an apple farm and orchard, which is prime location. He's already described to us how it's a prime location for that final scene and the showdown between him and the final girl. And we have the apple press and all of this very, very, like you said, autumnal, although it is like late summer. So I guess, I'm not sure. I know that many apple varieties are available in the fall, and apple picking is popular in the early fall. So maybe it's supposed to be early fall, but it's like just too perfect. This plan has so many moving parts. It's crazy to me that he would have planned it this specific amount of detail.
He's playing that fucking 3D chess, man. That means that them finding him agreeing to do the documentary, him simultaneously stalking Kelly as if she was the final girl, while at the whole time grooming Taylor to be the true survival girl that he wanted, seeing the potential in her, bringing her to go see Eugene, giving her the trade secrets, really building his actual legacy while creating a false one for her to think was true the entire time. This is a masterstroke of a twist that to this day I am impressed with, because the more you think about it, the more you go back on the why. Why is Leslie Vernon allowing this to happen? Why does he seem to not want Taylor and them doing this, but he's also at the same time trying to convince them to do it and to go along with it? Why is he being so personable? And it's all for her. It was all for you, Damien. It was, and the moment that I think really is the most chilling is when Leslie kills Todd. Because Todd is, even though he knows that Leslie Vernon's a bad dude and they need to like save people, and he's trying to use himself as bait, when Leslie Vernon is over him and he pulls off Leslie's mask, he's like, I want to see you. He's like, it's me, it's Todd. And you're trying to like, does he think that Leslie is in this fugue state, that he doesn't know what he's doing? Or is it that Todd was so conned, so bought into the bubbly guy showing us his turtles, that he doesn't know that this person that he's looking up at that's about to break his fucking neck was Leslie Vernon the whole time?
It's not a wonder Leslie Vernon was crying at the zenith of this whole plan, because it actually all was gonna work. It was about to work. It was the day before, the night of, basically, that this was all going to happen, and he did it. He had accomplished like a fantastic plan. I mean, it's not hard in a way if you're thinking like he's thinking of stalking people, to figure out that, oh, they're going to go to this abandoned cottage on this particular night, and this group of kids is going, and this is how they behave. Sort of how the night is going to go, basically. But everything involved in this, it's not a wonder he had a small moment of very, very deep emotion attached to the fact that his plan had worked out, and this would be the end, possibly, for him.
The using of the anchor point, which I keep thinking of, the anchor point, gang, in case you didn't know, is like a place on the property in which you can solidify his legacy, or it could be a tree or a place or some sort of totem on the place that could be, it's like how Crystal Lake, the lake itself, is where Jason drowned. The house in Haddonfield is where the murders took place. These places, the boiler room on Elm Street, those are like the anchor places for this. This is this fake story about Leslie Vernon tilling fields and how it is filled with blood and all that kind of stuff. And doesn't it make you just want the Leslie Vernon story to be real?
Yes.
Because even just by itself, you have this sort of scarecrow looking killer with a hand scythe, and God, does it fucking work. It really fucking works.
This is why so many people want a sequel, and whether they want a sequel or not, or they want the straight up story, they want a prequel, they want let's live in the universe where there are horror films for a moment and make a Leslie Vernon trilogy. That I can see that. I can see why people want this. They want the still in production hell, according to Internet Movie Database, before The Mask. They want to see the other film he was in, the short film, Wait for It, which, we'll get to the wait for it moment in this film. But yeah, he's a perfect serial killer. He's the sort of serial killer. Well, why am I saying serial killer when I mean horror movie maniac? He's a horror movie villain that we've wanted, that we keep looking for. We're chasing the dragon, so to speak, outside of the big five. Our Mount Rushmore of horror movie maniacs is done, and we need a new one. And we wanted Leslie Vernon, but we got behind the mask, and that's where he lives. It's sort of like having him in a snow globe.
You're so right. Man, like, you're so good with analogies sometimes, man. Like, that is exactly what it feels like sometimes. But I'm telling you, in that moment where Taylor finally becomes her survival girl persona, she unzips her cardigan and throws it aside, and now she's in what is she in? A bloody tank top. And she has, she has the axe in her hand, and she's like, oh, great, she found her penis. That she needs to penetrate the killer, and all of the other characters have died with a couple of exceptions. And I'll get to that in a second. And you have her going through that cornfield and all that kind of stuff, and you just think, oh my God, like, this is so packaged and patented to be a slasher that we're supposed to hold on to. The aesthetic is completely there, and it's completely manufactured. And I'm wondering why, lamenting again why, that when nowadays people try to make slashers like this, they try to, we need another first name slasher. They need to have a mask. They need to have an outfit. They need to have some kind of iconic weaponry. And they try to package it and patent it, and it fucking sucks almost all the time. But then when they did this here, it's perfect. It's so good, but yet even within the framework of the story, it's fake. And and like, that is so brutal. And I back in the day when you were creating slashers and they're wearing masks and they have outfits and they become iconic, everything was just made up on the fucking fly, it seemed like. The masks were chosen because they were available. This, that, and the other thing. We see it again and again. Like, it's just, why? Why does it have to exist, as you so artfully said, in a snow globe? But when Taylor is with the remaining survivors, and it's so funny, you have like the quote-unquote slutty girl, she's alive, and the jock boyfriend are alive, and they're having more dialogue, more character than you would expect. The stoners are really just the padding. Like, he says that early on in the film, that like, yeah, stoner characters, they're basically just padding, and sure enough they are. When they get into that barn and they have this scenario in which those kids are getting killed, and then Robert Englund shows up, and he seems to sort of unceremoniously get killed. And her only other friend really is Doug, who kind of drops the bomb, like, I love her, man. And he gets one shot, but his head banged against a wall. And that made me wonder, Leslie Vernon planned out everything so meticulously. And it's not too much of a spoiler to say there's more survivors in this than you might expect. Do you think he purposefully let Doug live?
I don't think so. No, I think that he really thought that he had done his duty and narrowed it down. I really think that he had killed him. I really do.
Yeah, it's just hard to say, but man, Leslie Vernon is a killing machine. One thing that's interesting about these kills is they're not very graphic. They're kind of graphic, but like in the sense that you do see blood, but there's a lot of pulling away from the camera. I don't know what that's in service to. Maybe they thought it would be too much to spend so much time with the killer and then see him brutally, let's say he was going to do kills like Johnny. Is that too much? Do you think that's what it is?
I have a feeling that there are things left on the cutting room floor, because I think that the beginning was so, it lulls you into certain expectations of a horror film, and you're sort of thinking of the caricature of a horror film in your mind when you're going through all of this with Leslie. So to present us with a hardcore rated R splatter fest might have been just too hard of a shift into the left.
I like when Taylor tries to jump out of that barn window and there's all those pitchforks and everything that are just right there. And if you were watching a regular movie, you'd be like, what are the odds? But we know the odds. That is all by design. He put that there because he knew that she would be running there. Again, this was all part of the plan. Taylor was always part of this plan. And this chase sequence is great. I love watching this, and you forget all of the meta commentary and you are right back into just watching a slasher and wishing Leslie Vernon was real. But I'll take what is it? Leslie Mancuso. I'll take Leslie Mancuso. It's fine. He's okay too.
He is, and it is that perfect lighting. They've got it pretty much pitch perfect, and it's only that lovers of the genre could really understand, I think. And sometimes some of these other horror movies that try this and fail are doing it because they see what other people creating horror films saw in the 80s. Oh, we can make money and it's cheap and easy on a weekend to shoot a horror film. And they don't really get it. Or they're trying too hard and they're like, oh, we need to have this filter and these sort of actresses and this sort of costuming, and the heart isn't in it. They've got that combination here of the heart and the look, and it just all comes together so perfectly. And an apple orchard, I think it's not quite been done in that way. No. Sometimes you're thinking, like, why is there an orchard beside this haunted house? Or why is there like a farm equipment graveyard next to this trailer park or whatever? This all makes sense, and it's fun when it makes sense. It's easy. It's less thinking you need to do. It's less holes you're trying to poke in it. Like, all the holes were already poked in this, so we can just sit back and relax a screaming girl getting chased through an orchard. Yay.
And also, there's an extra bit of dementedness that I think about with this film, is because Leslie Vernon is like making applesauce, crushing apples with this big ass fucking machine that,
like a cider press.
Yeah, cider press. And while he's talking to Taylor earlier in the film, when they're just about ready to get going, and he knows what nobody else knows, that he is currently demonstrating to her how to use the instrument of his destruction. She is showing him, this is how you're supposed to kill me, without any dialogue to that effect. So brilliant. It is so poetically done. He gets her head into that cider press. She gets his head into that cider press and starts to crush his head down. And with his last breaths, he just sort of, in awe of her, said that he knew it was her. I knew it was you. And she kills him, lights the entire place up, and as it burns, Doug and Doc Halloran show up. They have survived their ordeal, and the place is burning down. So well done. What a great fucking movie.
It truly is. Now, that's a great story there, Taylor. Now get out there and give me pictures of Spider-Man. Because that's the destiny. And not only has she succeeded as a survivor girl in his eyes, at this point, his legacy is once again cemented. He is the deranged Leslie Mancuso. who crafted this elaborate scheme and murdered a dozen fucking people or whatever. And it's going to be in the news. It's going to be in a documentary. She's going to write a book. She's going to go on a tour. You know, like all that is going to happen for her and for him because it is his legacy once again, if not for the first time, cemented as a maniacal, homicidal maniac.
Is this the ultimate fake it till you make it story?
So to speak. So to speak.
We were promised a sequel. And in this film, while they play the classic Talking Head song, Psycho Killer, we see a coroner being a coroner while Leslie Vernon rises from the slab and goes to, I suppose, kill again. And we never got one. We've been threatened with a sequel since 2006.
Basically, yeah, we have. And on one hand, it's the best way to make someone sit through the credits. I've never sat through credits anticipating something, the wait for it moment. Just wait for it. Just something's going to happen. They're not going to show this whole coroner doing coroner things with clipboards or whatever it is that they do, aside from eating sandwiches off of a corpse. Through this whole song, which is fine. I'll sit through this song. It's a good song. I'll listen to it. And then to see him rise, do the cane thing from wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, see him do the serial killer maniac from horror movie fame.
A lot of core strength
thing. Yeah. So he does that. You get that, the big payoff, and then nothing. So there is a short film called Wait For It. Starring Nathan Basil, and he is Leslie Vernon. It's credited as Leslie Vernon. I've not seen it, of course. No one seems to have seen it. It's only did a little bit of maybe South by Southwest or something last year.
Oh.
It has no release date. I would love to find it. There's been a graphic novel or comic series.
Yes.
Following Leslie Vernon. There is another film listed on Internet Movie Database as in production. Whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah.
Called Before the Mask. Stylized as B4TM. He's credited in it as well. So they don't pull this shit out of thin air necessarily. I've seen films that were they had scripts, there was producers, there were, agents interested. Like, there's a level of interest for a thing that exists, a script at the very least, and it shows up on Internet Movie Database and stays there long after the project has been morgued. But this one seems to have legs all the time, and I don't know why it hasn't been removed. I'm crying now because I want the sequel.
We are encroaching on the 20th anniversary of this film's release. And
yes, we are.
And so much has changed. The movie kind of is suffering from what films like this suffer from, where it doesn't make a whole hell of a lot in the box office, but yet finds its audience later. Trick or Treat was the same thing. Trick or Treat never made it to the theaters. It was a direct-to-video situation. And when everyone saw it, they said the same thing over and over again. Why the fuck did this not go into theaters? There's no reason why this couldn't have made a bundle in the theaters. Another film that we've been threatened with a sequel pretty much since it was released, since people discovered it. And there's a part of me that when it comes to, I know that when In a Violent Nature came out, I said, I'm kind of ambivalent. I don't really know if I want a sequel. Well, we're getting one, guys. So
immediately.
And that just goes to show that money fucking talks. It's like when you make that kind of money in the way that people who give you money to make movies understand it, It's just the old ways are the ways to go. They want to see that your movie made fucking profit. And I think the hard thing with this is this movie just didn't make its fucking money in a way that traditional money lenders or studios understand. And so they're going to make like 20 years. Do you think my fear would be it's over. You missed it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like people, you really have to strike while the iron's hot. People sometimes make fun of the fact that there was a Saw movie or a Paranormal Activity movie or a Friday the 13th movie every year for a while. You were just getting another one and another one and another one. And I was like, I'm sorry to say that, yeah, you could argue diminishing returns, but if you want fucking sequels to your movies, you have to make them. You have to make them and release them. And you have to make the audience fucking care. You cannot be denied. And I just would wonder, all of this wait, all of this anticipation, would horror fans be really, really happy? Sure, of course they would. Is your movie going to fucking make money and make sense to the people who lent you that money? I don't know.
The only person they would be able to pick the brain of, who could also, you know, sort of be a Herschel to him, like some sort of like mentor who has been there and done this, is Damien Leone of the Terrifier franchise. And maybe to a certain extent some of the Chucky ideas, even though there was lots of gaps in Chucky, and Chucky like was an IP that was like lent out to other people or whatever. The Terrifier series is doing it. They made money, they did well, but they didn't do well in the traditional sense with traditional routes. And Damien Leone is just like doing it anyway, so to speak. And whether it's using crowdfunding here and there, or, you know, there is a box office return, there is a huge rental market for Terrifier. It seems everybody's seen Terrifier and Terrifier 2. So to have Terrifier 3, it's all hot on the heels too. I was worried when Terrifier came out that we wouldn't get a sequel, because it ends in a very similar way in The Mortuary, with an sort like an implied resurrection. And no, it happened no matter what, and it was going to happen hell or high water, because I don't think it would have mattered if no one had seen Terrifier. We would still get Terrifier 2, and we would still get Terrifier 3, because it's really good greasing the wheels, so to speak, and there's a different level of Terrifier 2 that we're getting, but we would have gotten something. It's a shame to me that Before the Mask or whatever wasn't pushed out right away against all odds.
Yeah, you need merch. That was the thing that Terrifier did. It was like, how much Art the Clown stuff can you get? Like tons of it. Like go to Spirit Halloween. There's all kinds of Art the Clown stuff. I think maybe they did a Leslie Vernon mask, but that's the only thing that I seem to ever remember. And yeah, you can get like Art the Clown figures. You can get all kinds of stuff. And it's like part of being to some horror fans, like part of it is just how consumable can you be? Like how much stuff can we spend money on? Because, you know, if we're guilty of anything, it's idolatry, much like what Leslie Vernon wanted for himself. So what do we got next for him?
Coming up next, we have Evil Dead Trap, because it's a surprise West pick, and I've seen it once. I really liked it. It's a favorite of my husband's as well, so we do have it handy. It is available on Shudder, which is super handy. And I'm gonna have to look and see Tubi, because Tubi has a really good selection of this sort of thing. I think that this will fit really nicely, because we can continue talking about journalism, which is my favorite topic when we get into subtopics on our show.
Yes, I became very enamored with the film The Evil Dead Trap, and don't let the title confuse you. It has nothing to do with Evil Dead, but it exudes this 1980s aesthetic. I see on social media a lot GIFs and still images from anime from the 1980s and early 90s. And fun fact, since this is a movie from Japan from the late 1980s, it matches that aesthetic perfectly. And so I found just the atmosphere of this film so compelling, and the story has to be seen to be believed. I'm Wes Knight.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peaver and hosted by Lydia Peaver and me, Wes Knight. We'll see you next time.